Hideo Kojima popularized an entire genre and proved that the industry can make video games just as cinematic as films, which has made him one of the most influential and recognizable figures in gaming. I went back nearly 40 years to the very beginning to experience his growth as a developer and how his design philosophy has impacted the medium. Kojima has credits in a bunch of games, but in 22 of them, he's credited solely as a producer or in a supervisory role. I won't be playing these because while producers and supervisors are important roles in game development, they aren't typically as involved in the creative side, and that's really where Kojima shines. So let's jump back to the 1980s where he got his start. Released for the MSX in 1986, Penguin Adventure is often cited as Hideo Kojima's first game. It was already in development by the time he was hired though, and he only assisted with planning and pitching ideas for about a month or so before moving on to another project. He's not even included in the original game's credits and was given the assistant director title after the fact. But despite not being heavily involved with Penguin Adventure, this was an important experience for Kojima, and served as a bit of a reality check. His primary interest was in film, and he hoped to use video games as a medium to show off his ideas and eventually become a film director. He played the Nintendo Famicom while in school, and he viewed that system as a way to tell meaningful stories to potentially earn the opportunity to direct a film. So he looked into video game companies and eventually applied to Konami. Freshly employed and ready to begin writing and designing games for the Famicom, Konami threw him a curveball and instead assigned Kojima to the MSX division. He quickly realized that the MSX was underpowered compared to the Famicom, which presented a challenge for the games he had in mind. He persevered despite landing in a role he didn't envision for himself, and began contributing where he could. Learning a whole lot being on the Penguin Adventure team, it served as an important stepping stone in game development for him, which led to Konami giving Kojima the opportunity to design a game called Lost World. His intention was to create a war-themed platformer where the player controls a masked female wrestler, but Konami tombstoned it after Kojima was unable to simplify it for the MSX. Thankfully, this initial disappointment didn't discourage him, because he was about to define an entire genre. Released in 1987, Metal Gear is effectively the first game developed by Hideo Kojima, and what a way to launch a career. After the cancellation of Lost World, Konami reassigned him to a struggling project. Its first iteration was a whole lot different and action-packed than the end product. The problem was, the MSX was simply limited in its capabilities, and was not able to handle too many bullets or enemies on screen at once, preventing it from being a full-blown action game like Contra. So when Kojima was brought in to save the project, he elected to scrap the action-forward idea and pivoted to a stealth-oriented approach. While this wasn't a brand new idea, he didn't invent the stealth genre, but stealth games like Shoplifting Boy and Castle Wolfenstein were far more niche. This made the game stand out amongst a crowded lineup of shooters, saturating the market, and it became a certified hit. Its success in Japan led to Konami fast-tracking a port to the NES. With that news, you'd think Kojima was stoked to work on the console that inspired him to join the industry. Wrong, because Konami outsourced it without even involving Kojima at all. This expeditiously made port made some pretty major changes that most would agree make it an inferior version compared to its MSX counterpart. Regardless of that, it sold over 1 million copies in the US and became one of the system's most popular titles. I personally had never played the original prior to me beginning this video. The game is 2 years older than I am, and it surprisingly still holds up decently well. Unlike me. The stealth is simple for modern standards, but the intensity ramps up if you're spotted. It triggers a hectic Pac-Man-like sequence with enemies suddenly turning into crackheads that require you to run off screen as quickly as possible to simmer things down. It may seem archaic now, but I think it's a must-play for any Metal Gear fan, if only to see where the series began. And it's as easy as ever to access thanks to Konami's recently renewed interest in making games again. Many core components of the franchise were implemented right from the get-go. They had the iconic cardboard box, the alert sound paired with the famous exclamation point, you had one of the best video game characters of all time in Solid Snake, and the portable radio which would later evolve into the codec. Kojima conceived of this mechanic as a way to implement an actual story to the game so characters can have conversations with one another. It also served as a way to provide advice in moments where you might get stuck. It was a truly revolutionary game for its time, and it certainly helped Kojima stand out in a time when the industry was still rebounding after the video game crash a few years prior. Even though the plot in Metal Gear is quite simple, it was easy to tell Kojima wanted to tell stories any way he could, which means there is a good chunk of time where the player is not actually playing the game, and instead we're just watching it. This can be seen as a downside to some, but I personally love seeing the wacky stuff Kojima does with it. Moving forward, I'll be tracking the longest gap in gameplay in the games he's directed, because we all know Kojima loves his cinematics and his exposition. Metal Gear doesn't get much opportunity to show that off due to its simplicity, with the longest gap being roughly a minute long, but we'll see plenty more of that in his next one. Now, this is why Kojima entered the gaming industry. We know Kojima really wanted to direct movies, and using the technology at the time, a visual novel was the best way of doing that, which means Snatcher is vastly different from Metal Gear. It lacks a controllable character, with everything being done through text prompts, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of reading and listening, with the longest cutscene being a smidge over 33 minutes at the end of the game. Snatcher drops you into this kick-ass cyberpunk setting where you follow a junker, whose job is to hunt down cyborgs disguised as humans who are known as Snatchers. That premise probably sounds awfully familiar if you've seen some of the GOATs in 80s sci-fi, being especially derivative of Blade Runner. While some might hate this style of game and consider it boring, I was personally a big fan. It's honestly one of the best pieces of cyberpunk fiction I have ever experienced. Its art style and its music stand the test of time, but where it really shines is in its story. In a time where games were often seen as childish and simple, Snatcher delivers an engrossing and mature narrative that toys around with some of the themes we'll see Kojima expand on in future titles. My only complaints about the game itself is having to use the same command several times to exhaust dialogue options to move forward, and the shooting sections felt pretty meh. But those are small nitpicks in what I consider to be a masterpiece. Its production took roughly twice as long as most games at the time, so Konami had to rein our boy in and force him to finish the game before he was ready, and that's something we'll see come up again much later in his career. Snatcher was originally planned in 5 acts, but yet again Kojima found himself being restricted by weak-ass technology. Memory constraints with the MSX prevented him from fully fleshing out the story as intended, and it launched unfinished in Japan. It was eventually released for the Sega CD in the West, which is a complete version of the game and contains some very solid voice acting.
Let's just eat and then leave this place. Come on, Gillian, hurry it up. Come on.
It's a damn shame Konami hasn't made it easily available on modern platforms, because it's a must-play for any fan of Kojima. I mean, people in this universe have penguins for pets. I want a macaroni, and not with cheese. You can see the influence Kojima's experience on Snatcher had in his future releases. The conversations are similar to the codec interactions in Metal Gear Solid games. He began breaking the fourth wall, and he spliced in some goofy-ass moments that will become a signature of his. It was truly ahead of its time, and even though the game was considered a commercial failure, Konami remade it into an RPG with a helping hand from Kojima on design. But his contributions were relatively minimal because his plate was already full with an anticipated sequel. Full stop. Metal Gear 2 is one of the best games of its era, and like the original, it exists in 2 forms. After Metal Gear's success on the NES, Konami began development of a sequel without Kojima's involvement, titled Snake's Revenge. He never planned to create a sequel to Metal Gear, but a conversation with a dev working on the sequel changed his mind. He was convinced to write his own sequel, which would launch just a couple months after Snake's Revenge in 1990. But to avoid confusion, Kojima's game was released exclusively in Japan on the MSX, whereas Snake's Revenge saw a much wider release. Again, Kojima's game is widely considered the better version, and Kojima himself joked that Snake's Revenge is somewhat of a crappy game. I didn't play it for this video, so if you have any opinions on how the two of them compare, just let me know. Soon after booting Metal Gear 2 up, it became obvious that this is a refined version of the original Metal Gear. Everything feels much tighter, and the additions make it a far superior experience than its predecessor. Enemies in the first title were easy to manipulate, so in the sequel they were given more abilities to force the player to think twice about their actions. They have a larger field of vision, can patrol and chase Snake across screens, and investigate sounds. Otherwise, Snake controls and plays pretty much the same way as he does in the first game, but this time he can crawl and cause distractions by banging on things, like your mom. But one thing I need to know, why does Snake look like a middle-aged soccer coach, dude? This is not the guy I pictured crawling around enemy territory, ensuring the safety of the world from nuclear warfare. Kojima really came into his own with this one. Metal Gear 2 makes the original Metal Gear seem like a quaint little proof of concept in comparison. Not only is the gameplay just plain better, but the environments are heavily improved and the plot is just more fleshed out. There's a lot more dialogue and actual character development going on, which means the frequency in which you're not playing the game has gone up, with the opening sequence in its entirety being a little over 7 minutes long, and it is a hype way to open the game. Metal Gear 2 is way closer to the formula of the Metal Gear Solid games than the original Metal Gear. It became the blueprint for 2D stealth games, as well as for Kojima's later games, but before his rise to fame, he made a return to a familiar genre. Policenauts is a damn shame, because it was never officially released outside of Japan. It does Snatcher fans dirty who finally get a spiritual successor to Kojima's most underrated title, but have to get creative in how they play it. It's a point and click with heavy anime and buddy cop influences. There's honestly not a whole lot more I can say about this that I haven't already said about Snatcher. It's similar in some ways, but it's distinct in style and execution. It's a fantastic sci-fi with well-written characters and a richly constructed world. I'm sure it will never happen, but I really want Konami to remaster both Snatcher and Policenauts into a single collection so these stories can be experienced on modern hardware. It would give Kojima fans a way to play his earlier works before 3D games were prevalent, and he had to get creative in delivering long, uninterrupted sequences, with the longest here being at the end of the game at a little over 18 minutes. By 1994, Kojima directed, designed, and wrote 4 bangers, but just 4 years after Policenauts' release, he'll alter the entire industry forever. It's October 1998, and one of the best games ever made up to this point drops for the PlayStation. While the original Metal Gears were popular in their own right and did a lot for the stealth genre, Metal Gear Solid is the game that effectively launched it into the mainstream and inspired countless games after it. But even though this game is 3D, it still plays a lot like its 2D daddy. It has a similar camera angle with the top-down view and maintains most of the same mechanics we saw 8 years prior. But the biggest difference is how much more movie-like the game has become. It often cuts the sneaking and action with long codec calls and world-class cinematics.
What is it?
And none of this ever becomes a nuisance, even when waiting 15 minutes and 54 seconds in the middle of the final boss fight, because the animation and voice acting are so mind-blowing. You have to remember, this was 1998, when peak voice acting in video games was this.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Kojima was able to tell some engaging stories before this, but Metal Gear Solid was a perfect mix of what he learned up to that point. And despite it being an anti-war piece that juggles themes about genetics and their role in one's life, it does it in a way that doesn't take itself too seriously. That's perhaps one of the things I love most about this series, and it's something Kojima was able to pull off better than ever with newer technology.
So there's something you like about me, huh?
Yeah, you've got a great butt.
The power of the PlayStation helped Kojima fully realize his vision for this game, not just in the minute-to-minute gameplay, but in the boss fights as well. Anyone who played this game back in the day remembers that feeling when Psycho Mantis judged the game saves on your memory cards.
You like Castlevania, don't you?
Moved your controller with his mind, and dodged each and every one of your shots, until you finally figured out you just need to unplug the controller from port 1 and put it into port 2 so he couldn't read your mind. To this day, I am still astounded by the creativity of that idea, and it's helped make this one of the most memorable boss fights in history. Kojima's imagination stretched beyond the game itself, blending fiction with reality. There's an important codec frequency that can only be found on the back of the game case. During the Mantis fight, the screen will cut to black to mimic your PlayStation shutting off, and it repeatedly breaks the fourth wall throughout the game.
That's strange. There's no guard.
What happened to the music?
Hideo Kojima and his team of 20 crafted not only one of the best games of the 90s, but one of the most important games ever made. It proved that game developers could tell impactful and immersive stories on par with what Hollywood was putting out, and that as technology continues to advance, that gap is only going to get narrower. Immediately after the release of Metal Gear Solid, Kojima began work on its sequel, and with the release of the PlayStation 2, his ideas were even grander and bolder than before. The cutscenes had actual faces to look at, with fully realized eyes and moving mouths, so no more of those little head bobs to show a character talking. They continued to elevate the stealth mechanics even more by granting the player additional methods to sneak around the environment. On top of everything from the original, you now have a tranquilizer gun to put guys to sleep, and you can do it in first person to be more precise with your shot. I don't even think I can hit a target that small. Oh, never mind, I got it. You can hide in lockers and hang off rails, as well as shoot out cameras and hide bodies. It all felt like a very natural evolution of the gameplay. But Kojima had a surprise in store for us, because on November 13th, 2001, Metal Gear fans were about to get blindsided.
So that's why you changed my code name.
After 3 full games and a prologue playing as Solid Snake, we were suddenly thrust into the role of this guy. The game's marketing purposefully added Snake into scenes that actually featured Raiden. So when he's revealed as the primary character after the prologue, fans were pissed. Kojima elected to switch things up for 3 primary reasons. The first is just wanting to portray Solid Snake from another character's perspective. Snake is a legendary figure by this point in the game's timeline, so Kojima found it interesting to see that from an outside POV. He also wanted to add a character that would be more appealing to women. I'm not really sure how well that worked out, but Kojima's next reason was because he felt including Snake in tutorials was a little awkward. The guy has been through 3 full games by now, so informing him how to crawl, hide, shoot, and sneak presented a challenge that Kojima struggled to implement naturally, which didn't seem to be a problem in later games.
Impressive, boss!
This unexpected switcheroo made the game divisive amongst fans, who expected and wanted to play as Solid Snake, who was like the complete opposite of the inexperienced and way more emotional Raiden. After the initial shock set in, it was easy to call this game a masterpiece, and Raiden has been accepted as a fine character. My only complaints are that the boss fights are really weak in comparison to the first Metal Gear Solid. Fat Man was interesting, but he's really the only one that stands out. The environment is also less varied, so the struts Raiden traverses the entire game mostly look the same, so it's just not as interesting to explore. Regardless, those complaints pale in comparison to what the game does so well. Not only does it still play great today, but the game's themes are incredibly relevant and pretty prophetic in retrospect, with how it discusses the threat of artificial intelligence and the weaponization of information in the age of the internet. I'm not going to turn this video into an analysis on Metal Gear Solid 2's themes, but it serves as a prime example of Kojima's knack for weaving relevant and thought-provoking ideas into his works. And that was elevated because the PlayStation 2 allowed for some impressively animated cinematics that frequently interrupted gameplay, with the longest uninterrupted section being a whopping 41 minutes and 42 seconds leading up to the fight with Solid as Snake. Even though the game was initially divisive, it was critically acclaimed, and it sold over 7 million copies. If Hideo Kojima had his way, this actually would have been his final contribution to the franchise, but public and corporate pressure would have him return. Wait, this isn't Metal Gear. Hideo Kojima is not a writer or a director for Boktai. Instead, he lent his mind towards game design and production. He spearheaded an idea to utilize the actual sun to power your weapon in the game and defeat the enemies. Ironically, he realized that since gaming inherently forces players indoors, the very ones trapped in their dark rooms watching the movies he's created in this format. So he used the Game Boy Advance as a way to get players away from the TV and outside to get blasted with UV in order to defeat the vampires in the game. This was also considered a downside, however, because if you just wanted to lay down in bed and make some progress, you couldn't, unless you live near the poles where the sun don't set. As seen in previous games, Kojima loves experimenting with blending gaming with the real world. So this was a novel idea that drove up the cost of the game itself, which included a mini solar sensor in the cartridge. As far as the gameplay goes, you can definitely see Kojima's blueprint on this in the implementation of stealth and action. It has far less dialogue and cutscenes than your normal Kojima game though, with very little sequences where you're being bogged down by exposition. It's a fun little game with an interesting premise that made it stand out simply for its unique sunlight mechanic. The main problem is that the Game Boy Advance is a console that has a plethora of amazing games to choose from. So unless that sunlight mechanic sounded cool to you, it was an easy title to overlook, unlike this next one. In a year crowded with amazing games, Metal Gear Solid 3 stands out as one of the very best. For context, 2004 is one of the best years for game releases. There was a month-long period where gamers were straight up bukkakied with not just incredible games, but some of the best games of the decade. From the end of October through November, we had San Andreas, Minish Cap, Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, Halo 2, Metroid Prime 2, Half-Life 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, and World of Warcraft. I mean, how are we supposed to find the time to play these games? That might just be one of the best months of gaming ever, with all of them providing completely different experiences. But our focus here is on Metal Gear Solid 3, and to me, this is where Kojima and company perfected the formula. It continues to improve the combat and stealth mechanics from the first two, implementing a more engaging hand-to-hand system that makes Snake feel like a beast in close quarters combat. The Camouflage Index presented an option to change outfits to better match surroundings and blend in with the environment. Then paired with the vast jungle-based setting, players also had to manage survival elements, which some might have seen as an annoyance, but I thought it made the game more immersive, like Snake has been dropped into this region to truly fend for himself against not just the enemy, but the jungle itself. It's easily the most complete Metal Gear game to date. But of course, so many play it for the over-the-top story, and the game really shines there as well. There are still plenty of gameplay interruptions, with the longest one being 26 minutes and 48 seconds, after Snake finds Sokolov and is subsequently caught and tortured. While 2 got real weird with it, 3 feels a bit more grounded in comparison.
I am the pain.
I am the fear.
I am the end. I am the fury. I am the sorrow.
Well, maybe grounded isn't the right word because Kojima's signature zaniness is still in abundance. The bosses are super powered in their own ways, and each fight is completely unique. It's a major step forward from one of the few weak points in Metal Gear Solid 2, whose boss fights are mostly forgettable. Kojima continually sought new and interesting ways to present boss battles between the sorrow, which isn't actually a fight itself. Instead, it just shows you every single person you've killed.
Fuck you, especially you. You deserved it.
Then you have the beautiful, poetic battle between mentor and student that wraps up the game in an emotional gut punch. And of course, my personal favorite, the end, who takes the core mechanic of the Sniper Wolf fight from the first Metal Gear Solid and just makes it even better. The first time I played this game in 2004, this fight took me at least 45 minutes, and it ended with the end trying and failing to flashbang me after he caught me waiting for him behind a tree as he sauntered by. I unloaded on him and he fell right there. Everyone's first experience with this fight is different, and that's what I love so much about it. There are so many ways to approach this battle that it makes it one of the most unique across the entire series, and one of the best in gaming. You can even avoid it altogether by killing him early in the game, or by quitting out during the fight and either waiting a week in real life, or advancing the time on your console so the dude dies of old age. Now, while the game received universal praise, it had a major downside. By this point, the classic camera angle was seen as a detractor. In the other games, it was more manageable with close quarters environments and enemies who operated with vision cones. But in the larger open areas, containing enemies armed with a larger line of sight, it was more difficult to work with. The re-release Subsistence fixed this with an improved camera though. Regardless, when it's all said and done, Metal Gear Solid 3 is an amazing achievement that cemented Hideo Kojima as one of the premier developers in the industry. Plus, it has an absolute banger of a theme song. Probably didn't expect this to be on the list, did you? While Kojima wasn't a main designer or anything like that, he did help with the design of the Shadow Moses level. He wanted to see Solid Snake in Smash Bros. As far back as Melee, but the game was just too far along in development to include him. He persisted with this request until Masahiro Sakurai began development of Brawl, making Snake the first non-Nintendo character included in the roster. That elevated the series from a celebration of Nintendo to a celebration of gaming as a whole. It opened this iconic series up to pulling in even more non-Nintendo characters to the roster. And as far as the level itself goes though, it's fine.
And someday they might make movies where you control the characters yourself.
Sounds like magic.
Just 4 years after Snake Eater, Kojima really put the video in video game with Guns of the Patriots. He initially planned to move on from the series and announced his retirement as a director, but fans reacted negatively to this news, which unfortunately led to death threats that convinced the man to return to direct yet another game. It's never that serious to go that far as a fan, and it's ridiculous he and many others have had to go through that nonsense. Fortunately, he gave us another fantastic game in a legendary series despite feeling forced into it. But instead he gave us this glorious conclusion to an iconic character. This time, in Piss Vision. Side note, I don't know what it was about this era of games that made it so popular to slap this yellow tinge on it, but man, does it make an otherwise fantastic looking game ugly to look at. Regardless of that, Kojima yet again iterates upon a formula that has made him the most recognizable name in the gaming industry. It finally abandons the top-down camera seen in past games that made the varied environments seem far more expansive and explorable from the new angle. It takes the camo mechanic from Snake Eater and fixes the primary complaint about that. Instead of manually switching anytime you need it to blend in, the Octo Camo will do it for you to match the surface. Snake now looks like a pirate with a solid eye, which highlights items in the environment and brings back the mini-map to monitor enemy activity. Old-ass, crusty-ass Snake gets a little Metal Gear companion that is modeled after the robot buddy from Snatcher. This lets him scout ahead and stun enemies without leaving the safety of his hiding spot, but I honestly never really used it. We're also given the option to skip stealth altogether because gunning down enemies is now a more viable solution. The weapons dealer gives Snake access to a wide arsenal that allows him to manage the chaotic battlefields any way he wants. It's impressive how Kojima and his team at Konami have been able to continue improving the gameplay depth for over 20 years by this point. It's a major reason why Metal Gear is one of the most beloved franchises in the industry, and while I think this game plays extraordinarily well, the interruptions are far more frequent and can overstay their welcome at times. And of course, that's a major draw to these games, but because fans so desperately wanted a conclusion to the plotlines from Metal Gear Solid 2, Kojima spent a ridiculous amount of time closing those loose ends. That resulted in a Guinness World Record for the longest video game cutscene to wrap the game up in a whopping 71 minutes long. Everything is expertly animated, as it often is in Metal Gear, but wrapping up the game with a feature-length film is a little extreme, and I'm someone who absolutely loves this shit. I still remember finishing this game in 2008. I'm like 20 or so minutes into the ending, and my dad comes in to tell me dinner is ready. I was like, I'll be there in a little bit. This game is just wrapping up. I just straight up lied to my dad, dude. Completely by accident too. How was I supposed to know it would be another 50 minutes before it finally ended? Sure, I could have paused it, but I was invested. Kojima made my dinner cold that night, and honestly, I kind of respect it. Putting a full movie at the end of your game is such a big dick move, and it's actually a perfect way for him to wrap up Solid Snake's story. It's the entire reason why Kojima got into game development in the first place. He realized the potential of the gaming medium all the way back on the Famicom. Then, over 20 years later, technology has finally granted him the ability to direct what is basically a playable movie. It's a beautiful send-off to a fantastic character, and it's one of the best games on the PlayStation 3, piss filter aside. So, now that he's given the fans what they wanted, he's free to move on to something else, right? Nope. While the game started out with other members within Kojima Productions, the man himself elected to take on the director role while development for Metal Gear Solid 4 was still ongoing. It's an incredibly ambitious title exclusively made for the PSP, and might just be the best game on Sony's handheld. Thankfully, it was eventually brought to the PlayStation 3 in the HD collection, so Metal Gear fans had easier access to what is actually an essential game in the Metal Gear saga. Kojima originally planned for this to be titled as the 5th game in the franchise due to its importance. It's a continuation of Big Boss's story after the events of Snake Eater, and we can see some core mechanics from the Phantom Pain get its start here. The development team behind Peace Walker was just as big as the one behind Metal Gear Solid 4. There was a lot Kojima wanted to experiment with as the series moved on from Solid Snake to continue the story of Big Boss. The recruitment mechanics seen in Portable Ops is expanded upon. Now Boss is building up his own personal army, often just kidnapping them, and assigning each member to a specific team to keep the gears churning while he goes out on missions. While the PSP certainly had its limitations, such as most of the cutscenes being contained to comic book panels, with the longest uninterrupted scene being roughly 12 minutes long. The game took a lot of what made Metal Gear Solid 3 and 4 so good and molded it into a fun, portable Metal Gear. The missions are all relatively short, and each level is much smaller in comparison, but there's a lot of side ops to do that helps with further building Boss's army and amassing a wide array of weapons. It's a great Metal Gear Solid game that bridges the gap between 3 and 5. But even though it's an important game to completely understand the story, it sold real bad, especially compared to other mainline titles. That's in large part because people simply saw portable games as a lesser version of their console counterparts. So many just didn't give Peace Walker the chance it deserved, even after it was ported to the PlayStation 3. It was the first stepping stone in the evolution of the franchise and pushed it in a direction that would later be seen as divisive. But those ideas would take several years to develop, which gave Kojima some time to dip his toes in other things. Metal Gear Rising began as a spin-off under Kojima's team in 2009, but they struggled to develop the fast-paced sword-focused combat Kojima envisioned in the game. The problem is, they sought to blend that with the stealth action the series was known for, but they just could not get that to work cohesively. Despite their best efforts, it was effectively cancelled by 2010, while they focused on other projects. That idea just kept nagging at Kojima though, and he couldn't let it Fox die. So then in 2011, it was revived and handed off to Platinum Games, who knew right away that stealth had no business here, and refined it into this freaking awesome, stylish action experience with some seriously fun swordplay. I mean, you can cut dudes into chunks. Kojima himself didn't have a lot of direct involvement in the game, as he was busy with multiple projects and trusted the team at Platinum to do their own thing. He really only provided input on narrative continuity and character design to keep things consistent in the Metal Gear timeline. He left Platinum to hammer out the finer details, and that was a smart decision on his part, because the game is a hell of a lot of fun to play. It's just really damn short. Some might say it's the Danny DeVito of video games. Platinum was smart in maintaining the wacky nature the Metal Gear franchise is known for, and kept their focus on the action. Unfortunately, this series never got a chance to be revisited because some drama was going on behind the scenes. After 6 long years, another mainline console entry finally drops, and it completely changes how Metal Gear Solid is played.
Kept you waiting, huh?
Ground Zero still maintains its core stealth identity, but Kojima and crew overhauled the controls and camera to modernize the franchise. Boss is dropped into a small open-ended area armed with new tools that allow the player to approach the mission however they like. For me personally, I love the direction this game went and found the mission structure a breath of fresh air. It feels great to play, it looks incredible in the new engine, and it's much darker than any other Metal Gear Solid game before it.
Keep her gut in.
Outside of the beginning and the end, it mostly keeps you in control, so the longest time you're waiting to play is during the opening portion that's just short of 9 minutes long. And even though the game holds up really well over a decade later, it wasn't so well received upon release. That's really just due to its price compared to its 2-hour length. Audiences felt like Kojima and Konami were just giving us the privilege of paying for a demo. Just imagine this. The Tinker Mission in Metal Gear Solid 2 gets released ahead of the full game for a separate price. That's essentially what Ground Zeroes is to Phantom Pain. It serves as a prequel to the main game, which was still over a year away from release. It was originally intended to be a mission in Phantom Pain, but due to the cost of development, Konami urged Kojima to release something. This resulted in Ground Zeroes, which served as a little taste of the full game while they continued development. While kept under wraps at the time of Ground Zeroes' release, this is ultimately when Kojima and Konami began to butt heads. The two simply were not on the same page, and after release of Metal Gear Solid 4, Kojima began development of the Fox engine, and as you can imagine, cost of building a new engine from the ground up is quite a lot. Then on top of that, Kojima's perfectionism led to a long development cycle, which nowadays is the norm, but in the late 2000s and early 2010s, a 6-year development cycle was a long time. Kojima also elected to drop the iconic voice of the series in favor of a recognizable Hollywood actor. Kiefer Sutherland is a way more expensive pull than David Hayter, who had been voicing Snake and Big Boss since 1998. The ballooning costs ultimately began to fracture the relationship between Kojima and Konami, who was seeking short-term profits and easy money, whereas Kojima was just looking to do his own thing as he's always done. So they released Ground Zeroes to help recuperate some of the cost while Kojima and team continued to work on the full game. But unbeknownst to everyone, Kojima was about to change horror games forever. August 12th, 2014. The biggest what if in video game history was shadow dropped on the PlayStation 4. There was no background on it, no information whatsoever. Just a random new game with a somewhat creepy font. After downloading the mysterious title, the demo starts with very little direction. You wake up in a room. You open the door in front of you and begin traversing a hallway in first-person perspective. Clues littered around hint at a mysterious murder, but you keep on moving along until you reach the end and walk through the door right back at the start of the hall again. After several rounds of walking through the narrow corridor, things begin to devolve and it gradually gets more and more terrifying. Finally, after solving the puzzles, you reach the end and a video plays, showing this expertly crafted demo was a teaser for an upcoming Silent Hill game all along. But the kicker, it's headed by Hideo Kojima in conjunction with Guillermo del Toro. An exciting combination that would almost assuredly deliver an unbelievable entry into a franchise that kinda desperately needed something good at the time. But we never got that game, because the relationship between Kojima and Konami soured to the point where the only solution was to split. Despite only being a demo, PT had a massive impact on horror games. Kojima has gone on record saying he wanted to challenge himself and reinvent the genre. He didn't like that so many horror games had moved into being more action forward and saw an opportunity to create an experience that messed with the player psychologically. That paired with the mystery behind the game created this amazing moment in time where people online shared their findings and worked together to get to the end of the demo. Kojima successfully caught everyone's attention and brought gamers together to solve a puzzle, but the mystery wasn't the only fascinating thing about it. It took a basic concept and elevated that with its incredible sound design and unsettling environmental pieces.
You remember, right?
This teaser influenced a bunch of games after it, from massive franchises like Resident Evil to indie developers with Visage and Layers of Fear. It had a profound and lasting legacy that turned the gaming community against Konami, who delisted the game and canceled Silent Hills upon Kojima's departure from the studio. It's a game that will forever live on as a major question mark, and as a fan of Silent Hill, horror, and Kojima, it still chaps my ass to consider what Konami threw away. But they still had one more massive game to come.
V has come too.
Leading up to the release of Metal Gear Solid 5 in 2015, reports began to surface that Kojima and Konami will part ways after the game comes out. Konami planned to restructure, and Kojima's team was not a part of their plans. This led to a very public falling out. His name was wiped from all promotional materials, and Konami effectively barred him from anything related to a game he spent years of his life developing.
But unfortunately, he was informed by a lawyer representing Konami just recently that he would not be allowed to travel to tonight's awards ceremony to accept any awards.
And just like that, after almost 30 years of developing and evolving one of gaming's most beloved franchises, Kojima gets bounced from the company he began his storied career with. While this undoubtedly had a major negative impact on him, it finally let him be free from a series he felt tied to and almost burdened by due to fan and Konami pressure. It's just a shame Konami treated Kojima so unprofessionally and barred him from participating in anything related to the Phantom Pain. It was an immediate massive success, and despite Konami's concern over development costs, it made that back in just a single day. The Phantom Pain was a surefire hit, but depending on who you ask, it's either the best Metal Gear Solid or the worst. As for my thoughts, I'm conflicted. It's an extraordinary game, no doubt. It fleshes out that little sampler we got in Ground Zeroes and expands it into a massive game that can take over 100 hours to finish. Everything gameplay-wise feels fantastic. Mechanically, it's the best the franchise has ever been. You can choose to approach missions however you want, similar to how Hitman allows the player to take several routes to assassinate the target. You want to go classic Metal Gear and infiltrate the outpost without being seen? Go for it. Want to arm up and blast your way through? That's also a valid solution. How about you combo that up with a silent sniper rifle? Hell yeah. But does it feel like Metal Gear? Not really. Most fans associate Metal Gear Solid as basically playable movies, but Kojima believed that the philosophy that made this franchise so popular to begin with was now outdated. No cutscene is over 10 to 15 minutes long, although the opening of the game feels like an interactive cutscene most of the time. Personally, I think it's fine if cutscenes are cut down, but the bigger issue is the game's story does nothing for me. I'd go as far to say it's Kojima's worst narrative since the first Metal Gear game in 1987. He put a much larger focus on the gameplay itself, which worked out very well since the game was so popular and drew in a lot of new fans. It's a lot of fun to play, but I'm really missing that Kojima feel. Another major problem I have is the use of an open world. The worst thing a developer can do is make an open world game with a boring map, and that's unfortunately what the Phantom Pain does. I would have preferred if the game was a series of open-ended missions similar to Ground Zeroes. Just throw Big Boss in a smaller map and give the player several options to meet the end goal. It's the game's biggest strength, and I'm having the most fun when I'm figuring out the best way to infiltrate an enemy encampment and completing my mission. Its structure is already very similar to that since you can largely skip traversing the open world if you want. It would have felt more cohesive if it committed to the singular mission structure instead. It's easily the most fun Metal Gear game out there though, but not necessarily the best one if you're looking for that classic Kojima experience, which we will get in abundance with his next game. Just 4 years after Kojima's abrupt departure from Konami, he released his first game with his own studio. Feeling isolated and uncertain about his future, the idea for Death Stranding began to form. By the end of 2015, he founded Kojima Productions and began work on his next game. This newfound freedom gave Kojima the opportunity to create something truly different. Death Stranding is one of the most unique games I have ever played. It takes some of the mundane parts of open world games like traversing the map and completing fetch quests and turns them into engaging core mechanics. Navigating human and supernatural dangers in a strange post-apocalyptic United States has never been so fun, peaceful, stressful, and amazing to look at. Implementing online components so other players can help each other out elevates the experience to a whole other level. There have been countless times where someone's ladder, bridge, zipline, or abandoned vehicle has helped me tremendously, and despite not physically seeing these people, it provides a sense of connection to other players. Simply describing the game just doesn't do it justice, and it's something that just needs to be experienced to truly understand. Kojima proved with Death Stranding that AAA game development doesn't need to feel stale and safe as it often is nowadays with yearly releases and lazy cash grabs. They can take chances, and developers with strong visions can succeed even if the game is unconventional. But that's what sets Kojima apart from most, isn't it? He knows what type of game he wants to make, and surrounds himself with incredible talent that helps flesh out the ideas he has no matter how crazy they might seem. Or they convince him to pump the brakes and tone it down a little bit. While the Phantom Pain put narrative in the backseat, thankfully Death Stranding returned to the style of Kojima gamers have come to know over the years. It's mostly serious, with some of that signature goofiness intertwined, and there are approximately 7 hours of cutscenes, putting it right under Metal Gear Solid 4 as Kojima's most cutscene heavy game. But it doesn't come close to its longest, since Death Stranding throws in some shorter gameplay sections to break up the viewing sessions. The longest uninterrupted moment is about 21 minutes, right before the final end credits. But Kojima easily could have beaten his own Guinness World Record if he really wanted to. Death Stranding is a massive game, so the time spent playing still far outweighs the time you're watching it. Kojima and his team knocked it out of the park with their first release in their new studio, and with them being masters of iteration, I cannot wait to see how they improve it, because 6 years is the longest amount of time between Kojima games, and Death Stranding 2 is finally here. Judging by everything I've seen so far, it looks just as weird and amazing as the first game, and I cannot wait to dive into what will undoubtedly be another memorable experience. And that covers Hideo Kojima's career. While his storytelling techniques may not be for everyone, I think his career as a game designer is one of the best we've ever seen. He continually looks to improve upon proven formulas, finding new and interesting ways to make games feel fresh and fun. Personally, I am really looking forward to OD. Kojima's mind is perfect for horror, and I think he can pull off something wonderful and terrifying given a full game of that genre. Let me know what you'd like to see Kojima tackle next, and if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, share it, like it, all that stuff YouTube loves to see. It helps me out in letting me know what people like to watch. If you want to see videos similar to this covering other game directors, studios, or franchises, let me know in the comments. Thanks as always for watching. I'm King Deschain, signing off for now.